Well, hello. Welcome back to my channel. Joshana here to talk about some friggin' bookish stuff. So I got curious recently. I've been curious about this for a while because I see people ask all the time why there are step backs on books. And it just got me thinking about various things we hate about books as bookworms, or things some people hate, some people don't, but like some people really hate these things. And I got curious about the history of these things. So I went digging in the last couple weeks. I was doing a little research. Some of the stuff I couldn't really find a lot of information about, but I figured I would show you my findings and maybe answer some of your questions as well. So this is going to be the history of things we hate on books or about books. First up is something that I actually like on books. I don't necessarily prefer it a lot. I'm not like, oh, it must be this, but I do like it. It doesn't bother me, but it really bothers some people, and that is deckled edges like this, where it's like rough, right? So a decal is actually the frame that sits in the mold when making paper originally. I'll try to put some like images here, and every like resource I use to learn this information will be in the description bar as well. So if you care to go do some reading, some of the articles are actually very interesting if you're, you know, a nerdy bookworm, as I think most of us here are. So yeah, the deckled edge is created when you have the paper mold and then the decal framing it. And the way paper was originally made, or is made, is with like pulp and water. And so you'd put that in there and close the frame down on top of it. And some of that pulp and water would get like under the decal. So then when you take the decal off, there were these fluffy edges. Paper making started in China originally and then was in Japan, and they were trimming off those deckled edges, those extra bits. And when papermaking moved over to Europe eventually, they also were typically trimming them down when binding the books. I also found one source that talked about a time period for a little bit of time back in the day where they would make books or bind books by basically having one long sheet of paper with like the words printed each page, and then like kind of fold it up like an accordion and bind it. So then while you were reading, you would have to have a knife to slice the pages open. Some of the pages, if not all, would be closed. So you'd have to slice them open as you were reading. So that created a very rough deckled edge that was way more like abrupt and sharp than a typical like printer created deckled edge or paper made deckled edge, which was fluffier and softer. When book collecting started to become a thing in Europe around the 17th century, when people started collecting books as a sign of prestige and whatnot, and a hobby of book collecting, deckled edges became very sought after because people saw it as a pristine, original binding. And it was in the early 1800s that the, forgive my pronunciation, I think it's Fournier machine was created. So then paper was made, pages were made in long cut already rolls. So deckled edges were pretty much almost obsolete at that time. Now deckled edges like the ones we see here on Station 11 in modern times are created with sandblasting, sawing, or tearing. And one of the sources was an article from The Economist, which quotes, "Many modern readers are unfamiliar with the deckled edge and may see it as a defect. For example, Amazon.com has left notes to book buyers clarifying that the decal is not a flaw in the product." So there are people who would order this book and get it and think this was a mistake when it's very intentional now. It's manufactured entirely. So there is a brief history of the deckled edge. And yeah, it's still kind of seen as a kind of a prestige thing. If you can get books with original deckled edges, they're probably worth a lot of money, but nowadays any books printed in modern times, mass printed, mainstream publishing, etc. Those are going to be very intentional and manufactured. People do still make paper like the original, more handcrafted way. You'll see like journals and stuff. I've seen lots of journals where they're like handmade pages that have like the very soft, fluffy edge. That's like an original handmade deckled edge. So what started this whole little research journey for me is step backs. I actually have two examples here. One is a small one. So this little part where the page, like the pages come out further than the cover. And then when you open it, it has like marketing stuff, right? Blurbs, critic review blurbs. And then this one is the same type of thing, but it's a little thicker. You can see here, and it's like got some pretty, it's like a rainbow, and then it just says the title and the author name, but then when you open it up, it's the cover that is on the hardcover, which is different than this. So that's the hardcover cover, and then again, there's some, quotes in here and stuff. So that is a step back. That's what that is called, this stupid thing. I don't like these. I get it for the genre that they kind of originated from or became wildly popular and almost like a requirement of those book covers, and that is with romance genre, but we'll get into that. So it started with tip-ins, which I have an example of what it might have looked like. I don't have an actual book that has a tip-in, but a tip-in was something like this. This is kind of like a fake tip-in. So you would have the cover and there would be like a little hole cut out, or a little like part of the cover cut out, and you could see something behind it. So it would be something like this. This isn't actually one, but you can see like she's peeking out, right? With this book, you have to open the actual book and it's the end page that is like, boop, there she is. Originally, tip-ins would be a paperback like this. So it would have this, and then you'd flip open the paperback, and right on the inside cover like this, it would have that. But this is obviously hardcover, so it's not actually a tip-in, but that's the idea, you see? And they were typically glued in page inserts, so it wouldn't even be part of the actual binding of the book. This little tip-in page would be something added after the fact and glued in after the fact, artwork that was glued in later. So mass market paperback tip-ins really gained popularity in like the 1970s. And it was mostly with like pulpy genre fiction, sci-fi, horror, etc., and some romance. The first romance step-backs can be linked to around like the mid-1970s. Pocket books, which is under the umbrella of Simon and Schuster, were the first. That was the first publisher to really start doing it. One source I found said that Touch the Wind by Janet Daly might be the first known one, but of course they weren't 100% positive. And it was really in like the 1980s and the 1990s that the romance genre, specifically historical romance, just went wild with stepbacks, where, and I'll get some examples if I can, where the cover would be the couple being like a little more appropriate, right? They might be just standing next to each other like with the clinch, where they're just like holding each other. The man is like grabbing her. But then you would, and there'd be like, you could see a little bit of the artwork over here on the side, and then you would open it and it would be like a full piece of artwork of them being a little more scandalous. Maybe now they're like lying on the grass and her top is pulled down with her bosom popping out almost, like something a little more risque would be on the inside. So it was kind of like a little secret cover. So that is where they really gained popularity, because with the romance genre, you can imagine that was like a fun thing, and some people would be embarrassed if like this cover would be the one on the cover. So it was like a little more appropriate for public, like I said. And yeah, they just, like all the historical romance books from the 80s and the 90s especially had the step back like that, or a tip-in. I could not find information though, this was really frustrating me, on really when it became widely popular to have step backs that aren't like another cover. I mean, this kind of is, but this is just the cover from the hardcover. But like, when did this become popular? And like this isn't another cover. Like, when did it become popular to have a step back in other genres other than romance and just have marketing shit on the inside? When and why is my question, because I get it with the romance genre. Like, that's a fun thing for those types of covers. And honestly, if that's what they were doing with other genres, like if this was this artwork and then you opened it and it was different artwork relating to the book, I honestly wouldn't mind that. I just hate that they're doing this for the sake of, ooh, marketing blurbs. Nobody cares. Nobody gives a crap. So I hate it. I think it would be fine to me if they did it with like fun artwork like they do in romance. But now, and I've seen romance books now, more modern, contemporary romance books that do this type of thing. They have a step back, but it's not artwork on the inside. It's just marketing crap. So I don't know when that started. That was very annoying that I couldn't find that because that was kind of the whole point, but it's whatever. It's fine. If anyone knows, if anyone like works in publishing and is aware or has looked into this before, can find. I was on like page 4 or 5 of Google and I searched like 5 different combinations of words and phrases and I just couldn't find anything. So there you have it. But that is what step backs are and kind of a brief history of those. Another thing I couldn't really find a lot of information on, which was annoying, but I, again, wanted to talk about it. So if anyone does have any additional information, you can let us all know in the comments. But stickers and emblems. I was specifically looking for when they started to become so popular for marketing purposes and when they started to become permanent emblems. This is not a sticker. This is just part of the book cover. Now soon to be a major motion picture. This is one of the more like low-key ones I've ever seen. This is not as egregious as like the goddamned Netflix. Soon to be a Netflix adaptation. It's like this big-ass sticker. Hate it. Hate it. If it's a sticker I can take off, fine. Like the Barnes & Noble like sale stickers, those are easy to take off. Cool. Great, grand, wonderful. And I guess if it's a sticker like, or if it's an emblem like this, where it's, you know, it kind of blends in a little bit with the design of the cover. It's not a super glaring, like, oh God, that's a freaking emblem. It's okay. All right. It's fine. I get it. Like I found a bunch of articles talking about why these are good for you for your book for marketing. So they're pushing it real hard on the back end for marketing purposes. I don't know who this affects in a purchasing fashion. Apparently it does because there's market research to prove it. I don't know anybody that gives any craps about there being, and like the Reese's book club pick or even like an Oprah book club pick. I guess that, I guess I get it, but I just don't like them and I don't care. But we are also bookworms. We are not kind of the average consumer here on BookTube. So I guess like the average person, probably that would stick out to them like, ooh, it's going to be made into a movie. Maybe that means it's really good. Which sometimes it does, but it doesn't always, as we know. But yeah, I couldn't really find that. I did find something interesting. National Book Award winners, the stickers that say like whether it's a finalist or a semifinalist or a winner, they have to purchase those stickers. Like those don't just happen. They have, like the publisher or the author, I guess, has to go and buy those in bulk to get put on their books, which is wild to me. Anyway, next up is dust jackets. I did find a fair amount of information about dust jackets. I included dust jackets because I don't like them. I don't like dust jackets. Like, I like the aesthetic of them because, like, here's an example. This is a dust jacket that is a lovely, I like this cover. And then you take it off, and I like the color of the cover, and I like the spine. But, like, you know, this is boring. I much prefer, you know, a good old naked hardcover that has a design on it. I like it better. I hate reading with dust jackets. Hate it. So if I'm ever physically reading a hardcover book, I always take the dust jacket off while I'm reading because this nonsense and like, I hate it. Oh my God, so effing annoying. So that is why I included dust jackets. And it was very interesting. As early as the Middle Ages, people were using some form of book protection, not necessarily the modern dust jacket. Irish book owners in the Middle Ages would travel with their books, which were very prized possessions, in something called, and forgive me if my pronunciation is incorrect, a cumhdach. And it was a little jeweled book box, basically, that they would travel with their books in. And then between like 14th and 16th century in Europe, books would often be wrapped in silk or leather or some kind of fabric, both to protect them, but also just for decoration. They were considered very, again, highly prized objects, signs of wealth, etc. Earliest known dust jackets were for gift books, which were kind of like annual, semi-annual books that got printed that were like meant to be gifted to a friend and things like that. And it was back in 1830, and they were luxuriously bound in silk or leather and finely decorated, so the dust jackets served to protect the binding before the book was gifted, and then they were meant to be thrown away. Since they were disposable, they featured minimal decoration, often just the title of the book they covered. They also covered the entire book like a package and were sealed with wax. Think of it like wrapping paper on a Christmas gift. That is from a Bunch Auctions article. And the 1850s is when dust jackets started to be seen where you could see part of the hardcover versus being entirely wrapped and sealed in wax. Around this time, most dust jackets were made and purchased separately from the book, typically for the bookseller to have to protect their investment or for the book purchaser to have to protect their new possession. Slipcases were also starting to be used around this time, which was literally a little box that you would slide the book into. I have a Wuthering Heights that's like that, where it has a little slipcase. And around the 1920s is apparently when publishers started to focus more heavily on the design of the dust jacket versus the naked hardcover itself. And not everybody was a fan of this even back then. And there's a quote from Book Riot of some guy giving a lecture saying, "The wretched thing started as a piece of plain paper wrapped round the book to protect it during its sojourn in the bookseller's shop, but it has become this important, elaborate, not to say costly and embarrassing affair that we know today, and of which we sometimes deplore the very existence. How much better might this mint of money that is emptied on these ephemeral wrappers, little works of art though many of them may be spent on improving the quality of the materials that are used in the making of the book itself." So it's nice to know that there were book snobs even back then. And then in the 1930s and 1940s, even some paperbacks were printed with dust jackets, notably some of the first Penguin classics, which now are classics, but Penguin paperbacks. They were the first ones to really start caring about the design of paperbacks and printing paperbacks in a cheaper way. And yeah, a lot of them had little paper dust jackets on the paperbacks. And aesthetics and cover design, of course, change over time and have changed over time, but the general layout and information provided on a dust jacket has pretty much remained the same since the early 1900s. That is all of the historical information I could find on these things we hate, things some people hate. Not everybody, of course, but yeah, again, a couple of the things I couldn't really find a lot of information on, so if you know any more, please share in the comments below and let me know if you hate any of these things. I'm sure we all hate. I think everyone hates the stickers. Everybody. I don't know anybody that's like, I love those. Nobody likes stupid stickers on books. As always, thank you so much for your time. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.